We're very lucky today to have a fantastic panel talking about augmented reality and virtual reality, two technologies which are really disrupting the advertising space right now. On one hand, we've got virtual reality, which Deloitte is predicting to have its first billion-dollar year this year. Goldman Sachs is saying it's going to be bigger than TV by 2025, and it really, it's a really exciting time for this technology. On the other side, we've got AR, as we've heard from Ahmed today, which is being used, we saw an excellent example yesterday, which was shared with us by Queek, of how Gatorade used kind of augmented reality to gain over 160 million impressions for their Super Bowl advert. It's also being championed by Tim Cook of Apple, who predicts that it will it will grow enormously over the next few years. So I'd like to welcome our panel here today. And I'd like to ask each one of you to please tell me your name, where you come from, and give me one short, pithy example of why you're excited about the way that these technologies are kind of disrupting the industry.
Sure. I'm Carl. I'm head of VR at Framestore in London. Framestore is a 30-year-old visual effects company where traditionally we work on commercials, traditional advertising, and feature effects for movies. Over the last 3 to 4 years, we've been running the virtual reality department. We've won 80+ awards for things from IP-based content to branded content. The thing that's most exciting for me is so much of what we do sometimes in our industries is behind closed doors, and VR, although it's kind of been around for many years, is now kind of coming to the fore where you can go onto the high street and buy the headsets. The exciting thing for me is what's going to happen at Christmas this year when everyone's actually going to be able to get their hands on some headsets and see what how the consumers drive what we've been driving over the past 3 to 4 years.
Exciting Christmas present times. Excellent.
Yeah, it will be in my house. That's what everyone's getting. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, so I'm Ahmed. I guess I introduced myself just before. The thing that excites, and I work at Blipper, the thing that excites me about it actually is the AR becoming, let's say, an everyday thing through Pokemon Go, and thereby enabling that, proving the business case and enabling the technology to become ubiquitous. The thing that will happen off the back of that, which I find really exciting, is this idea of the internet on things. So a whole new internet where you can experience it through AR, but effectively mixed reality through a headset in the future, and it changes the way we live our lives, and I think it could be completely amazing. For what it's worth, and not wanting to jump ahead too much, but I think that the AR and VR are going to end up being this thing called mixed reality in not very long, but I guess we'll talk about that later, and that you can kind of get the depth of VR, but delivered through AR.
I'm Karen. I'm the interactive lead at Adam and Eve. We're pretty famous for storytelling, and we're very well known for TV, such as John Lewis, amongst lots of other integrated work that we do. For me, the reason I start with the point around storytelling, VR, AR, MR, BR, all the different realities, for us, it steps us into a new world of story playing and story doing. And I think for brands, that's a really exciting space to be in if you want to shift beyond just telling a story, so just a broadcast medium, into something that's more immersive, where your users are in control, or your audience are in control of the experience themselves.
Hi, I'm Ed Gregg. I am the disruptor at Deloitte Digital. So my job is to look at new technologies and work with them, creating proof of concepts to find out how our clients and how Deloitte ourselves can use that new technology. And one of the ones that we've been looking at and working with a number of clients is virtual reality, and also we've been doing augmented reality kind of in industry, kind of industrial applications for it. The thing that I think is really exciting is, I guess, the trend within advertising, things like ad blockers and the rise of kind of personalization is forcing advertisers and brands to think differently about how they relate with consumers. And I think that so the immersiveness of VR and the way in which AR as well can be very immersive and very personal because it's happening in the space around you. I think that will kind of change that will kind of progress this trend towards kind of more personal advertising, and it will progress that change in the relationship between advertisers and brands, and kind of force brands to think more creatively about the content that they're creating.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so I'm sure quite a few of you, when you saw the agenda for today, looked at the AR, VR kind of titles and thought, actually, what is the difference between the two? And I know, Omid, you started to cover that in your presentation. But and we were talking backstage, and it sounds like actually the ecosystem is much more complex than just augmented reality and virtual reality. Do you want, Carl, do you want to talk me through a little bit?
To give it my best shot, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, the good news is everything is all pixels, so technically it's all the same. So it's about how you create and you generate that image and the way in which you display it. To separate out AR, VR, 360 video, and mixed reality. So AR is where you take a virtual object and you place it in your reality. Virtual reality is where you are transported to a virtual environment and you feel present and are able to interact within that environment. 360 video is an evolution of traditional video, except you can capture in 360 degrees by 180, so you can put yourself on this stage or on the surface of a ship or wherever you like. Mixed reality is a combination between augmented and virtual realities. To Ahmed's point earlier, which is what you'll see from stuff like Microsoft HoloLens and Magic Leap. But I think the main thing to think about, which I'm sure others on the panel can elaborate on, is everything at the moment is very tech-focused. And it's around, should I use this headset or that headset, or is this the right camera or sound, and all of these things. The most important thing, back to Karen's point, is around storytelling and objectives. What do you need to do? What's your business challenge you need to solve or the objective you need to meet? Because it might be that one of those things is the best thing to do, or it might be that a traditional form of advertising is the right way to go. So, all of these things are very exciting, and I love working on the projects we work on, but we're also not, going out there selling snake water, saying, this is the magical thing, the silver bullet to combat ad blockers that's going to suddenly see your ROI shoot up through the roof. That's not necessarily the case. It's a fantastic tool, but used in appropriate ways.
Karen, I know that you're you work with kind of brands every day, and you're asked lots of these questions. You must be asked quite a lot. Kind of how can we use virtual reality in our brand campaigns? How do you answer that question?
It's interesting, actually, because the question we probably get most is, can I have a VR thingy? So it's not even, how can I use it in my brand campaign? Often it's, to Carl's point, it's, I'd like a VR thingy, an AR thing. I've seen that won an award. Can I have one of those, please? And it's a bit like, can I have a website 10 years ago? It's the same sort of question time and again. What is really reassuring is that brands and our clients are aware of these technologies. And for us, it's really trying to start with, what's the message that we're trying to communicate? Who are we talking to, and where are they? And VR and AR won't necessarily be applicable to everyone, but it can be a very immersive way to engage rather than just talk at. So if there is an opportunity to create an experience, then that would be where we would start to look at which one of those technologies would be the right time to do it. And I think it's exciting. I think there's lots of possibilities. I think AR, because it's more directly related to handsets, and pretty much everybody has a mobile phone. There are more mobile phones sold than babies born every minute. That's a really interesting place to start when it comes to some of the things that you were talking about earlier. I think with VR, headset penetration is going to be a bit slower to take off, but That doesn't mean you can't create an amazing experience. It just means that perhaps you think about, is it a sponsored experience? Is it an in-store experience? We've done some stuff with John Lewis, for example, in the past. We've also played with 360, which can be an immersive way to get an experience over that doesn't necessarily need a headset. So you can also do that online. So for Virgin Atlantic this year, we did some 360 reviews of places that you could travel to, and we saw huge uplift with that. And then the second part, I guess, to that is where you can show that content. So obviously Facebook and YouTube allow some great formats. Snapchat have opened up a way to experience these things. So it's about the right piece of content at the right time, which is what marketing is and always will be about. It's just the right use of technology in the context of where your audience are.
Great.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, our motto within Deloitte Digital, and within my department especially, is fall in love with the problem and not in love with the solution. And so I think that echoes exactly what Karen's saying. And I think to Omid's point, I think actually with a lot of the distinctions, well, firstly, if you're looking at the problem, not the solution, then the distinctions kind of come afterwards. So think about what problem you're trying to solve and then look for the right medium. I think longer term, I think it is going to be, I think mixed reality is where it will go. So everything will be kind of mixed reality. So I think that's the direction that all of this is going in. So you'll then be very much more about picking the problem that you're wanting to solve and then picking the tool to do it, but it'll be some form of mixed reality.
So I'm just thinking, I mean, I've built these things when I set up the panel, I was building these technologies as almost kind of competing. You're kind of, are you guys saying to me that they're complementary? And what does that mean? I mean, although they may be in 10 years' time, obviously we know within this industry we've got a fantastic novelty bias. So what is the reality right now?
I mean, so for me, so to your point, one of the issues about any kind of emerging technology is the kind of innovation or gimmick bucket, which is usually poisonous for any project because it's never implemented that well. And for me, it's almost this kind of meta narrative over the top of it all, which is and to be honest, I think we've been through all of that now. I think the important thing is to for the technology to be configured around driving some kind of behavior change, which a brand is willing to pay for, or whatever, but broadly. The historical barriers, though, have been to do with the cost of content creation, but I think that's going to change over time too. That prototyping VR content is generally is more because there's more video to do and more post-production. AR content is quicker to prototype because it's shallower. But I guess the most important thing in my mind is to think about the strategies as well. So it's these are digital platforms. They can be used to broadcast an experience, which in a different way, or they can be used to provide an interactive, personalized experience. And then if it's interactive and personalized, is it brand storytelling or is it brand utility? Or are they the same thing? Well, not quite, but they're kind of, they have the same eventual outcome, but they're kind of the content that appears is different in the immediately. So my agency life before I joined Blipper, I've been in integrated agencies and in digital agencies and shopper, and there's a huge difference in the content that you would produce with a shopper solution versus a kind of traditional brand narrative. And so I'm very, very cautious to advise when I'm working with brands, whatever, with agencies, is to think about, to the points that various others have made, that what's the right content that was going to drive that kind of behavior. And the content might be interactive, it might be a film or whatever, but actually what does the person need to see at that moment for the outcome to happen?
So, I mean, just on this idea of kind of barriers and costs, I mean, I've seen kind of things like the Oculus Rift are extremely expensive. And I've seen some, although it might be, I think, Christmas may change these figures, but I've seen kind of statistics from Strategy Analytics saying that actually only kind of 3% of British households will have any form of virtual reality kind of kit by the end of this year. And of that, most of it's going to be kind of, your Google Cardboards and kind of quite low-cost devices. If the consumer hasn't got access to this technology yet, is this something that marketers should be spending their money on right now and thinking about right now, or is this something for the future?
Shall I jump in?
I mean, all I would say on, and I'm sure Karen can elaborate further, is I would kind of liken it to mobile phones in terms of technology and price point. So cost to purchase the technology, size and awkwardness of the technology, and the cost to operate. Like when my dad had a horrendous car phone in the car and a thing on the roof and this huge ugly thing with like green luminous buttons on, just seemed ridiculous at the time. And then I think, probably 5 years later at school, I had a Nokia 5110 with snap-on covers and I could play Snake on it. And at the time I thought, well, this is as good as it's going to get. And you fast forward 15 years and everybody has a computer in their pocket that's capable of way more than you could have ever possibly imagined at a free or subsidized or of minimal cost. So to judge sales based on this year, when it's the first year they've become commercially available, all of the headsets, probably isn't strictly fair. And Moore's law says that things will get faster and cheaper to produce, et cetera, et cetera. So is it something that marketers should be looking at as an area? Absolutely, depending on, again, what is your objective and who are the people you want to talk to and where. And as we get more statistics about the kind of people, is it early adopters? Is it, Gen C, Gen X? Who do you want to talk to? And that should dictate whether it's the most viable proposition. I think the reason why that question gets asked is, to Karen's point earlier, advertising is used to talking at people. So if you're talking at 10 million people, you have a certain expectation on what your return is going to be. I wouldn't look at it as I can talk to 3 million people. It's how engaged, even if it's a smaller audience, how engaged are they in what I'm showing them and how memorable is it? And therefore, does that hold higher value than 5 seconds of pre-roll that you're going to skip or block?
And I think the bigger challenge, to build on that, is actually, as marketers, I think our biggest challenge is content. So creating the right kind of content for the right kinds of platforms. And quite often what we face is clients saying, well, we've got a TV script, so surely we can just turn it into a VR thingy, which is normally straight after the can I have a VR thingy question. And actually it's a journey, because when you're creating for TV, you are in control. Your audience are sat on a sofa, they're waiting to be entertained. You're also in control of the shot, the grade, absolutely everything from beginning to end until the moment it goes out on air. When you're putting your user in a 360 environment, essentially you're relinquishing that control to them, especially if it's a full virtual reality one where they're interacting. They control what they see next. They control whether they interact. So you have to think about not just the direction that your story is going in, but what are all the possible things that person might see if they look up, look down. If they look over here for too long, does the branded experience bring you back over there? And it's a really interesting exercise to go through. And again, it's a similar mind muscle going from, as a brand, telling your story to thinking about, as a user, how might I experience this story? And that poses a lot of challenges when we're thinking about the content. And then the other piece to that is that a lot of the time, it's an afterthought. So especially, and if you've worked in integrated agencies, you'll have had this as well, clients do want their shiny TV ad, and it's still very important. But then we'll sort of get through the production of all of that, and it's like, right, what else can we do? And actually, as I'm sure you guys will add to create a brilliantly immersive virtual world takes just as long as making a brilliant, amazing television ad. So when it's an afterthought, or when it's sort of fudged together from other assets, the quality of the content can actually be a bigger challenge than what headset it might go into.
But that's a life lesson, though, isn't it, really? Like, if you set out to do one thing and then you try and turn it into something else, you're building a house and you go, oh, yeah, and I want to put a swimming pool. It's just fundamentally, it's not going to quite work, is it? So it's always...
And that comes down to this question of understanding what the medium can do and therefore why you're choosing this medium. You're not just saying, I want a VR thingy because it's cool and because my 13-year-old is using Pokemon Go. You're saying, what can this do? And therefore, I'm building something specifically for that reason. I think the other thing that's interesting is, I agree completely with those 2 points, but I think, and the other thing I would say is, Facebook obviously own Oculus, and Mark Zuckerberg has talked about it and obviously has an interest in talking up virtual reality as the next media. I think the interesting question is, if you as an advertiser had known about mobile or had known about the web prior to it actually becoming mainstream, what would you have learned about storytelling? What could you have learned about storytelling? What could you have learned about the medium if you'd managed to get in on the ground floor? And how much of an advantage would that have given you? And if the answer is, actually, it wouldn't have made any difference, we would have been fine, then maybe you don't need to experiment with VR and AR and these new media. But if the answer is, actually, that gave our competitor a massive lead, because they were the first people to have an effective website, not the first people to have a website, but the first people to have an effective website, then I think the answer is, can you afford not to be doing the experimentation? Because for a brand, because you don't necessarily need widespread consumer adoption. You can do those kind of experiences like the John Lewis one, where it's kind of an in-store experience. So you can test what works in storytelling and then go from there. But if you imagine 10 years ago, before the web, would you have wanted to get on that bandwagon early, or were you just not fussed?
I mean, this is where I think VR and AR aren't in the same place, because you're talking about kind of a momentum of case studies and heuristics around a kind of a method, and therefore there being faith and do you go first, do you go second, do you go third, and AR is, having been around for, frankly, longer than Blipper, it's getting to the point of the likes of Procter & Gamble doing what they've done on Max Factor, thinking this could be the next thing that disrupts the category, like they've done in so many categories, and seeing. Whereas I think VR's there hasn't been enough, actually, even though it's really immersive and amazing. I don't think there's been enough of kind of mass scale, brand building kind of case studies that they've got there. It'll come, I think. But, I think that for me, the chronic problem isn't actually the money, to be honest with you, because if it creates enough value, the money will come. It's more how long are people going to spend removed from their everyday lives, and how frequently will they do that? Now, if they spend a lot of time and do it frequently, then it's great. If they don't, then actually that will set the context for the opportunity for VR.
That raises quite an interesting point, actually, just to take it outside of pure advertising. So there's been some studies recently that has proven that VR has reduced levels of PTSD in soldiers through sort of cognitive use of it 4 or 5 minutes each day, every day. There's theories being put into place to take that approach with younger children with perhaps problems with making friends, or having fears, or behavioural issues. And I think there are other uses of VR, and I know you've sort of used it in training internally. I think there will be a way of adopting this sort of around the edges before we just have to go straight into, well, let's unpack the advertising experience. I think there are many more uses for it. And certainly when you think about the application of mixed reality, there's definitely utility layer with that, and certainly Microsoft in their vision for the future demonstrate a plumbing situation in their vision, where they've got classic female doesn't know how to fix the sink being told through by a male on the other end of the phone who definitely knows how to fix the sink. But it's okay because she's got the HoloLens on and I can see exactly what you're augmenting and telling me to do. But there is a very real situation, and you touched on sort of new glasses and moving forwards and how that may be adopted in the future. But there are some practical applications of things like that now. And just another one for 360 specifically is certainly with charity and news. we're seeing huge uplift in engagement. And in a particular one that I thought was quite compelling was for a charity called Water. And they created a 360 environment, but had it in Gear VR headsets at a fundraising event, a charity ball. And before they went into the bidding, they asked everybody to put these headsets on. And it essentially went through the story of a 9-year-old girl whose mother had sadly passed away because she picked up a disease in the water, and it was her job to go and get the water every day, and it told the story of her day. And then sort of WaterAid came over the horizon and put in piping and plumbing, and the village all ended on a happy note. But the important point to that is that the emotions evoked by being in that experience rather than seeing a slideshow, which is what they had done the year before, they had fourfold the investment go into charity raising that night. So there's a direct return on being in an experience rather than being told a story. So it's thinking maybe just outside of the what is the experience and where is it relevant.
So that leads me quite nicely to my next question, because, and I'll throw questions out to the audience after this one. So we heard a lot yesterday about ad blocking, and we heard a lot about how, kind of essentially, consumers have forever tried to avoid adverts. So with an experience such as virtual reality, or with, kind of some of the way that augmented reality is being superimposed on kind of shopping experiences, etc., how are we going to avoid making the same mistakes in this space as we have in other spaces? How are our ads going to have to be useful? Kind of like how, if you're immersed in a kind of virtual reality environment, are you going to make the insertion of ads kind of welcome and useful? I'll throw it to Ed first.
Yeah, so I think, as I said at the beginning, I think this is kind of the big trend, the wider trend in the industry is towards, people have gained more control with ad blocking, and also now with kind of AI assistants. Because with an AI assistant, you then have more control over the content that you're getting. So consumers have more control, and so advertisers are going to have to be invited in rather than being able to kind of broadcast their message. And so I think this is why it's really important then to think about how you can make the experience one that is useful to the consumer, and the consumer wants to be kind of part of that experience. I think there's some interesting stuff that we're seeing already around kind of good experiences, and I mean the subtle use of kind of product placement, or the not so subtle use. I mean, there's Will Smith, not the Will Smith, it's another Will Smith, hosts a show called The Foo Show, which is the first kind of VR chat show, and they often talk about games, and they kind of bring the actual gaming environment so that the audience and the people who are chatting are actually in the game environment and talking about it, and you can interact with stuff from the game when you're in the experience. So I think that that is one way of making it useful, and then obviously some of the stuff that Blipper is doing as well around kind of storytelling in the real world. Again, it's a useful tool that is meaning that people are being invited. They're saying yes, I want to use this, rather than having it broadcast at them.
Do you agree?
I mean, I see from the data on our platform that we're definitely kind of shifting towards like a pull mentality that's an imperative, isn't just a kind of a cool option. Brand utility, actually be interesting enough that people invite you in, as you said. Just think about it. You've got a headset on. It's identifying people's faces of people that you can't quite, who you recognize them, but you don't remember who they are. And it's kind of reminding you when you last spoke to them. It's nudging you about, popping into the gym, or, something you might want to buy. And you've just about got it personalized to the level where the interaction suits you. And then all this kind of programmatic, nasty, branded nonsense appears that, you'd reject it completely. You just wouldn't wear the headset, So, and And so then the question is, at what point does a brand kind of actually know that you probably do want a coffee? So when Starbucks says, I'm here, look, it's just around the corner, you think, great, I'll do that, or whatever. And it's just a kind of different way of thinking it through. I mean, one of the things that's really evident on Blipper now, frankly, is that when you provide an opportunity to interact, which is a kind of culturally based one as opposed to, let's say, an advertising based one, the interaction rates go up. I know that they put it this way, quite often we'll get 1 or 2% on packages, 100 million packages, 1 to 2 million unique interactions. That's good enough, actually, it's big. But if it's culturally relevant, like a pop group, or like a special interest thing, like a magazine, it can be 30%. The highest we got was 80% on the final One Direction album, which was interesting. It just shows a different mindset. I think brands have to try and be that interesting, and then people will interact with them.
I think there's also two ways to think about advertising in this sense. So you've got the channel itself. So if we were to think about VR or AR being a channel, so the experience becomes your advertising. And then there's the other side of it, which I think is more relevant to the ad blocking side, which is if it's a window into an experience, so I'm putting it on Facebook or I'm putting it on YouTube or wherever, then I think I agree with everything you said, but there is just a general, consumers don't mind being advertised to, but they hate crap adverts. But that's just a general rule of thumb across the industry. I think it comes back to, as brands, being responsible for giving something to the customer, and that's just, again, I think it's just not doing it for the sake of doing it, having the right piece of content in the right place at the right time. And if it adds a use, then I don't think ad blocking will be a problem.
That's almost exactly what I was going to say. You've got to give the consumer something, whether it's an experience or it's an offer. And it's no surprise to see, I guess, and I'm not a massive One Direction fan, but you've given somebody there, and in some ways an experience. Hence, you see 80% uplift rather than interaction, rather than 1 to 2% on, on something else. So I think really, Karen put it quite well to think of, in terms of rethinking what advertising is. Does the content become the advertising, and how does that work? If you've invested, like I said, over £1,000 or hundreds or whatever it is, and the first time you put your Oculus headset on and you see your Facebook ad stream come up, it's going to drive you bonkers. And I mean, if we did what we did with digital and apps and websites, and we just take traditional media, turn it into a PDF and put it on a screen and call it digital advertising, that's not going to work either. So I think it will take a bit of time as we all spend more time in the medium. Yeah.
I mean, these platforms are so data rich as well. I think that there's a responsibility on us to use the data wisely, and there's a huge opportunity to create personalized experiences with that data. And we have the opportunity to do the opposite as well.
Great. Okay. I'm going to stop us there and throw questions out to the audience. Does anyone have a question for the panel? Anyone at all?
Answered them all.
No? Okay. Last chance? Okay. All right. Well, in which case, I will ask a final question, and that is about responsibilities. So it sounds like one of our responsibilities as advertisers is to produce better content and think much more carefully about kind of actually where we place it and how it interacts with kind of user experience. What other responsibilities do these new kind of technologies kind of throw up for us?
I think there's, just jump in with this, I think there's probably, for me, one that I'm quite passionate about, and that's, I write children's stories in my spare time, which is why I specifically am. I think it's being mindful of some of the effects that having a headset on specifically can create, and we've come a long, long way, as you'll be able to add into. We've overcome nausea, and we've overcome a lot of challenges that it's thrown up, but I still think there's a responsibility to just be mindful of who's consuming it and for how long, and if it is an extended period of time, how do we just keep that balance as well, because I think it could we could go too far very quickly.
I think one thing is to kind of be responsible for is, like anecdotally, a friend of mine told me he was exhibiting something at Cannes this year from a well-known someone in the VR industry, and he had he was showing people some content, and he held his Gear VR out to show somebody. He said, "Oh, do you want to try this VR thing?" And the guy said, "No, I've done VR. I've done it." So, and I can kind of see why somebody would say that if they see it as like they do with like people do with a lot of digital things, is I've got to do something with Leap Motion or a Connect or a website, or I've got to do something. It's like the whole tech first thing. I would just say. It can work very well. We've had some great success with lots of the stuff we've done, and we've done a mixture of brand-based and IP-based things. Just don't judge everything by the first few things that you see, and try and look at as much as you possibly can, because there's much more to all this stuff than YouTube 360.
I think that, to Karen's point, I think there's a lot that, it's related to the idea of creating good content, but there's a lot that you can do. It is the reason we use it as a training tool is because it's more effective at changing people's behavior than just video or something like that. So the scientific studies so far have indicated that, and its ability to kind of immerse you in an environment it makes it very, very compelling. And people have starved to death playing massively multiplayer online games, and they are definitely. There's a Dilbert cartoon, which always is a good measure of what's definitely going to happen, but there's a Dilbert cartoon where one of the guys accidentally starves to death while wearing a VR headset. So we do have to be very careful about that. And there's some interesting stuff about how you can kind of shift people's perceptions. Actually, there was a really good video recently where there's a guy walking in a line, walking in a straight line, and then his perception is subtly shifted inside the headset, and you can see him, he still thinks he's walking in a straight line, but he's actually veering off. It's very amusing, but also shows how powerful this potentially is. But before we get to that, we will have to create good content that people, before we get into mind-altering stuff, we're definitely going to have to create decent content that people like to consume. Otherwise, we're not going to get there, because people are going to be like, "Oh yeah, I've done VR and it was a bit crap."
We'll get there with IPs and studios, so advertising won't get there. That's what will happen.
Yeah.
Because people think, that's what I think.
Yeah.
I think so I agree with what the guys have said, but I think there's something else as well, which is that there's the opportunity through these technologies to kind of more democratically distribute expertise globally. And I think there's a huge responsibility on the industry to work out how to do that so that, AR or VR, whatever it is, I'm obviously biased towards AR, but whatever it is, means that someone in a developing country can have access to medical insight where they have no access to a physical doctor, or children in certain countries can learn, have educational experiences where teachers can't be found, and so on. And so, for me, that's the kind of biggest thing. I mean, there's the data thing, there's the effect it's going to have on our behaviour and building sustainability. But there's this kind of era-changing, kind of transformational thing to do with this technology changing, making insight, knowledge, and whatever more accessible to everyone in the world. And that's, that's certainly what I hope happens. That's certainly something that Blippar wants to happen.
Great. I think that's a lovely way to finish. Thank you so much to our panellists. And thank you very much, everyone, for staying here. And I'll hand back over now.